The whole world is guilty before God. This is a statement that every Christian needs to have a clear understanding of if they hope to be effective in winning the lost. None of us were born perfect. No one was born saved. But at some point in our lives, God's Spirit opened our eyes to the state of our condemnation. Salvation isn't something we can earn. It's a free gift for those who understand their hopelessness before God. Even after we were saved, it's still God who is worthy of all glory and honor for what He's done for us and continues to do in us. It will never be us. But the problem arises when individuals forget where they came from. The whole world is guilty. Condemnation is a universal human condition. When we truly know this, we have the ability to be used by God to reach out to the lost. But if we forget it, then suddenly so-called Christianity takes on an us versus them mentality. Those who have been saved often forget that the salvation they have was a gift and didn't originate within themselves. This deception from the enemy causes once faithful children of God to begin to look down on the lost as if they were some sort of second-class citizens. Throughout the New Testament, we see this attitude played out and condemned by Jesus first, and then the apostles after Him. This false Christianity is a show. It's an outward appearance with no inward change. Frequently, those who believed this way started out as faithful sons and daughters of God. But somewhere along the way, the enemy sowed his corrupting seed, and the change was so gradual that the individuals didn't even notice that they had begun to fall short. Paul had to confront Peter when he began to exhibit these qualities. We read in Galatians 2:11 through 13. But when Peter was come to Antioch, I withstood him to the face, because he was to be blamed. For before that certain came from James, he did eat with the Gentiles. But when they were come, he withdrew and separated himself, fearing them which were of the circumcision. And other Jews dissembled likewise with him, insomuch that Barnabas also was carried away with their dissimulation. Now their desire was to be seen a certain way to those who were Jews. They didn't want to be seen condescending to consider the Gentiles equals in salvation. This is hypocrisy. And we today have a tendency to look down on Peter and others for their behavior while ignoring the fact that many of us behave similarly. Paul explained this view of the situation from God's perspective according to the truth in Galatians 2:16. Knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law, but by the faith of Jesus Christ. Even we have believed in Jesus Christ, that we might be justified by the faith of Christ, and not by the works of the law. For by the works of the law shall no flesh be justified. Now this is just as relevant today as it was back then. We're not justified by obeying the doctrine any more than they were justified by obeying the Jewish law. Paul went on to explain this position and the simple truth of how salvation by faith works in Galatians 2:20. I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave Himself for me. It's not obedience to written words, but submission to the living Word that causes us to stand justified before God. Salvation is not obeying a list of rules, but when Jesus is living in and through us, as Paul describes of His own life, we will behave as we should without any consideration for what any list of instructions might say. Just as with the Jews, any list of regulations is only to lead us toward a life submitted to God. After we allow the Spirit to take control, those words become weak and obsolete in comparison to the direction of the Spirit working in our lives. When we remember that we are hopeless apart from God, Only then will we begin to have a sincere concern for the spiritual condition of those around us. Only then will God be able to use us to draw souls closer to Him. If we're not fully surrendered to God, the church will not grow. But when we find ourselves in the place where Paul was, we will not be able to build fast enough to contain the masses of new believers.